Hey everyone, welcome to the GTM News Show. I got Graham here today. Hey Graham.
What's up, man? How we doing?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for coming on the show. Which I should really call the pod because the pod sounds way cooler if I were to call it that.
Like a
But
video pod, like a
yeah,
bot.
totally. Yeah, totally. So yeah, I wanted to have Graham on. So he is an executive recruiter, specializes in the go-to-market space. And we connected a while ago, and we've been sharing content on LinkedIn and chatting back and forth there, and notice he has not only a lot of great ideas around recruiting, hiring, looking for your next gig, etc., but also just a good grasp of the fundamentals of go to market. So I thought it'd be cool to have him on to kind of talk through two parts. Number one, from the company side, what are your strategies, how to find, attract the right talent, and then also from the talent side, as you're looking for your next gig, this has been a crazy year. If you've been following my own personal journey, I got laid off at the beginning of the year. Lots of folks, especially in the B2B space, go to market space, marketing and sales, have been laid off. So maybe we can talk a little bit about your thoughts on how to find your next perfect gig. So, Graham, before we jump right in, I'd love for you to kind of get us up to speed, right? It's November 2nd of 2023. Tell me about what's your grasp and feel on the market as a whole. Just general takeaways of as far as folks hiring and just folks getting the next gig. What's kind of your pulse on the market right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, the market's kind of been a little bit weird since, the post-COVID boom, I would say, right? COVID came around, the world shut down. And then early on, kind of tech was leading the pack and had a bit of a tear until I would say around July of 2022. That's when we saw the kind of what I call the valuation bubble, right? A lot of companies raised a boatload of money at like a 22x valuation. And I think there might have been a bit of a realization that maybe a lot of that stuff was a bit aggressive. So since then, we've kind of seen a pullback, which has been unfolding over the past, I guess, year and a half now. That's the bad news. The good news is, I would say the second half of this year, we've definitely seen a bit of an uptick in demand for our services, which I think might be a good indicator of what's going on in the overall market. The interesting thing about this downturn or this, economic headwinds, whatever you want to call it, is uh, jobs have not gotten easier to fill, right? So most of the time when you have an economic downturn, right, like there's more supply on the candidate side, jobs become a little bit easier to fill, and we're not really seeing that,
Hmm.
which is I think unique to this one. But also I think it kind of lines up with macroeconomic stuff, right? Like unemployment's still low, so it's been unique. It's been interesting. There have been days where to be a recruiter, it's like kind of tough, but yeah, the second half of the year has been pretty good to us. So I think there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Very interesting. So that's fascinating. Just I'd love for you to go a little bit deeper into why you think it's harder to fill roles with, the supply increasing. Any thoughts there before we jump into other topics?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts. I think it has to do with like why companies have been laying off and why companies are trying to. I mean, a lot of this is about optics. A lot of this is about, unrealized gains or losses, markdowns on like VC portfolios, right? So founders are trying to pull an Elon, cut some, in a lot of cases, cutting some headcount. They're trying to be looked at as like an astute operator, somebody who can control the balance sheet, extend runway. And then when they are going to hire, they're trying to be really selective, right? They're being very selective
Hmm.
actually, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that they're going to pick and choose the candidates that they want to hire, right? So for somebody who's looking for work, that can still be frustrating. Maybe there's enough jobs to apply for, enough hiring managers to engage, but maybe you're not having the most luck. So I think that's probably part of the reason. It's also binary to a degree, right? Like there's a lot of companies that are still hiring, and a lot of companies that are just really kind of a little bit in trouble, right? So it's a bit of a mix.
Fascinating. Well, that's interesting, especially with like an increase in supply when it comes from the company standpoint. It's yeah, that supply doesn't necessarily mean you have quality candidates or it's the right fit. And in fact, all things being equal, if there was a huge demand a couple years ago, I'm sure a lot of people were hired that weren't always the best fit, but that's the only option they had. So the surplus in the market could be folks that are not always qualified but still need a job, based upon the fact that they got hired into a role in a desperate market versus a market where yeah, they were qualified for, overqualified for. Super interesting. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit. I'd love to hear how you think about building a high performing go to market team, and really, finding and attracting. Like, what do you look for? Just kind of a general topic. Love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to hiring a high performing go to market team, it depends on the strategy, right? I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about the different life cycles of a startup and a business and what might be important in those different stages. But the first thing you need to do is understand what your go to market strategy is, right? And I think that's like 80% of the battle. For instance, and things are changing. It's a moving target, right? What worked in 2021 and 2020 and 2019 isn't necessarily going to work today. So an example of like a recent trend that we're seeing is a lot of startups are starting to have some good success with investing really early in marketing, specifically
Hmm.
in like product marketing and content, and have, starting that flywheel up early, and then hiring sellers in to support that demand that they're capturing. Um, if you listen to some of the heavyweights in the space and like the sales space, like Sam Jacobs out of Pavilion, right? He talks about sort of the old model. It's kind of dead, right? So I think today, and it sort of pains me to say this because I am a recruiter, right? But I think the answer is less headcount, but the right headcount, right? And a good
Hmm.
example of that I'll give you is you'd rather have 5 account execs that are completely swamped with opportunity versus 10 account executives that maybe are struggling to hit quota, right? So I think that all lines up with the economic pressures that we've gone through, and these companies are just trying to do more with less. But I think to a degree it's probably better experience for the candidates that are hired too, right? If you're there, that there's enough demand for you to service. It's going to be a better experience as an employee.
Hmm. Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, thanks for starting out with, pivoting to hiring marketing first. As a marketer, demand gen leader, and consultant, I'm obviously biased, and see the value in that. But even if folks have been listening to the show, we've talked about, even a couple episodes ago, we talked about the predictable revenue model and how that, so many SaaS companies, so many B2B companies use that as a model to go to market, right? A very outbound sales led way of generating activity, and that has become super saturated. So now folks are looking to, like you said, content. They're looking to partnerships. They're looking to, customer advocacy, paid media, community-led growth, all these other strategies, product-led growth, right? All these other strategies to how to go to market and get customers. Still using a sales team, and then that even ties into your second point, which is how do you ever really, instead of having your sales team so focused on generating the demand, they're more focused on closing the demand, really high performers that can, once you've generated it through all these other forms, you have these amazing, sales reps and sales folks and AEs that can close it, and focus less on, them actually, doing outbound, making cold calls, doing whatever. Not that it doesn't have a place, but it's supplemented by, marketing, creating the demand a lot more versus it being done by sales. Super interesting. Thanks for sharing. I love kind of dived into, you already talked about it a little bit in regards to the different maturities, levels of, organizations. So I love to hear kind of like what your thoughts are on, obviously like seed stage, series one, like 0 to 1 million, or just getting started, and then 1 to 10, and then beyond that? What are your thoughts on growing your team? What do you see as best practices, and different things people should avoid?
Yeah, so I mean, 0 to 1 million, you don't have product market fit, right? You're probably founder-led sales. I think the first thing you need to get right is lead gen, right? I think in any business, biz dev is the lifeblood of that business. If you don't have a machine built that will consistently bring engaged prospects to the table, you don't have a business, right? So right off the bat, right, you're talking biz dev, marketing, building an audience. Then if you get to this stage where, you're ready to sort of get away from founder-led sales, I think the founding AE is a critical hire. You definitely want somebody who's entrepreneurial, somebody who's a killer, somebody who can kind of do it all. It's sort of a unicorn. And I think the other thing there that's really important is you need to look at their motivation as well, right? You need to have somebody who's also motivated by sort of tinkering and helping you sort of figure it out, which might not directly lead to quota attainment, right? So I think getting creative with like comp structures in that type of role is probably a good idea too. Once you move past 1 million in sales, right? Let's just say you're 1 to 10 million in sales. You've probably gotten your first hint of product market fit. It's probably time to, I'd say probably around like maybe 2 million, maybe 3 million in sales. It's probably time to get a head of sales in there to start to, solidify and fine tune your go to market motion, sort of be the steward of that, GTM playbook. Beyond 10 million, into the 20 to 100 million range, I think it's sort of like pour gas on the fire time, right? Like triple down on what's working. You're probably already starting to look at new markets, whether that's going upstream or like vertical adjacent stuff. So, I mean, every company, the other thing to note, like every company is a little bit different too, right? Every company's got a different product, a different value prop, a different, variation of how they're going to market. And I think, the headcount that you need will be largely dictated by what that market and that motion supports.
Very cool. That's super helpful. Yeah, I love that, and thanks for taking me through what you've seen, and definitely resonate, especially with a lot of the companies I work that are under 10 million, focusing on first getting started, getting that demand growing, lead gen, business development, getting the opportunities coming in. And then also, I really appreciate what you said as far as finding, like if it's an AE or a marketer or whatever, and creating a unique comp structure to motivate them if I'm hearing you correctly, motivate them for the success of the entire business, right? In some ways, right? Maybe that's equity, maybe that's a bonus on hitting the overall revenue targets. Any thoughts on that, especially for early stage companies? Because I think that's so important, where I see, for example, I'll see an early stage company, maybe they're under, they're a couple $1 million in revenue, and their enterprise motion, right? And so they go hire somebody that's worked for, a Fortune 500 company, a Fortune 1000 company.
Yeah.
And there's this complete misalignment, right? Of first experience, the adaptability you need in a startup, in a small business that can wear multiple hats, that can be a marketer, a salesperson, that can be customer success, be whatever it takes, right? To be successful. Any thoughts on any best practices you've seen, number one, on qualities, maybe dive a little bit deeper into the qualities of those early stage GTM folks, and then any additional thoughts on comp and how to
Yeah.
incentivize those people?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, right? So like if I'm a seller or if I'm anybody in go to market, I'm coming to work for a startup that is 0 to 1 million in revenue. I'm clearly risk on in general, like as a professional, right? I want to go take risk. I want to be a part of something. I want to be a builder, hopefully, right? If not, you're probably in the wrong place. So I think just like it's cliche, but that entrepreneurial spirit, like getting excited about that stuff, right? And one bit of advice I would give to founders and really early leaders at these early stage companies is like be bluntly honest about all the warts, right? Like all the good, the bad, and the ugly about the company, because people will self-select away from that, and that's a good thing, right? You want somebody to be like, oh, that's like, yeah, I don't want to do that, right? don't feel like you need to sell everybody to come work for you. Be
Mm.
honest about who you are as a company and what you need done in that particular role, and let people kind of self-select into that. So that's the first thing I would say about like the type of person that you need, right? In terms of compensation, right? You'd probably guess that a lot of these employees are going to get some sort of equity grant that they'll be excited about. We all know like the math, right? The likelihood of that paying off is, few and far between. When it does, it can be awesome, but they're going to want some equity. But when you talk about like sellers or marketers or like anyone specifically that's comped on like revenue, that's tied to revenue, a large portion of their job is going to be to kind of help you figure out the best way to do their job, right? So you're institutionalizing that knowledge of, hey, this is how X company does X function, right? That's more of like an operational thing. It's more of an exploratory thing. So I think if you're in a position as a startup to compensate them, based on like those like soft skills or whatever you want to call it, maybe, the first founding rep you hire isn't on a 50-50 split. Maybe they're on a 70-30 split or a 60-40 split or whatever it is. But I think that you need to bake in the time and the effort it's going to take and the value that they're going to bring by helping to institutionalize that sort of knowledge of how do we figure out how to do this?
Mm. Fascinating. Thanks for sharing. And kind of on your first point, as far as being super real, super transparent when it comes to just the obstacles you're up against, right? The challenge you're up against. I just got done reading The Splendid and the Vile. It's a World War II book. The first kind of like couple years, kind
You're
of
talking my
following
language.
Churchill. Nice. Yeah, I'm kind of a little late to the game, but it's a great book. And I think the biggest thing I took away from Churchill was just his ability to be really frank about the challenges, right? And like I think as humans, we're immediately, risk adverse, right? And like we don't, we're immediately trying to find all of the BS, right? The filter the BS of somebody. And I think I really appreciate about Churchill, and I see actually a lot of leaders doing this now, maybe replicating what he's done, or even political leaders, or even in business, is you paint a really realistic picture of the negatives, right? You're just like, we're up against hell on earth, right? Or whatever it is. Um, but then you also bring in the positive, right? So and I think what's really cool is, and I've actually seen recruiters or even hiring leaders that I've worked for, they do that, right? They paint a really clear picture of what's going on. Like, don't hide anything, because first you'll build that rapport with folks. Number one, you'll build that trust with them, but then when you contrast it with the upside, right? You're like, hey, here's all the cool things we're doing. You have this perfect package where you providing transparency, providing the realness of what's going on, but then also here's all the cool, here's the mission, right? Here's what we're
Mission.
gonna achieve, right?
Mhm.
And super cool. That's
That's it. You
awesome.
said it. Like it's the mission, right? It's not about, it's the mission is really the essence of like, that's what you want to be the main reason why somebody comes and works for you because they believe in the
Mm,
mission, right? It's going to be hard.
mm.
It's going to be tough. We're up against the odds. Great. Let's do it. If you can find that, you're golden. So yeah, totally agree.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of the search, how to find great candidates. You mentioned there's a large pool of great candidates, or it's a large pool of candidates in general, but a lot of times organizations are still struggling to find the right candidates. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, like best practices, if they're, to engage somebody like you, a recruiter outside, or if they have recruiters internal, or if they don't have any recruiters. What's your thoughts on how do you find the best candidates these days?
Yeah, for sure. First, I'll say everybody is a great candidate for the right job, right? I think
Hmm.
there's an important distinction there.
Hmm.
Everyone is just like there's plenty of fish in the sea, there's someone out there there's a job out there for everybody, right? So
Hmm.
anyone could be super dangerous in the right role, but you just have to find the right person, and that
Hmm.
person's just got to find the right job. So I'll start off by saying that. In terms of, I'm a hiring manager. I'm looking to expand on my team. I want to go out and hire somebody. I think the first thing you need to do is just get crystal clear on exactly what you need, right? Define exactly what you need. And we have an acronym that helps with that. It's called our FACT acronym, right? So FACT stands for functional, achievement, customer set, and then technical or product set, right? And if you think about any job, right, you're going to have certain hard skills that you need this person to do, and they can slot into one of those four, um, buckets, right? And I think, you know, it's really hard to find like the perfect candidate that's going to check every box. But I think the first thing you need to do as a hirer is decide where is the real complexity lie in this job, right? Is it the functional stuff, right? By function, maybe it's like I need somebody who's been a content marketer for a B2C company that like, is in the food and bev space, right? Maybe they need somebody that has that content marketing piece because they can't train up on that, right?
Hmm.
The achievement stuff, that's a lot of times about like, how to gauge, right? It's usually like 1 to 3 quantitative stats that prove that that person's good, at their job, right? In sales, it's pretty basic, right? This person crushes quota every year for the past 1,000 years, right? um, Customer set, right? Maybe that's something that is, maybe that's where the complexity is. I'll give you a good example of that. We have a customer that sells a CRM, a BI and analytics tool into the private equity space, right? If you know anything about private equity, highly sophisticated buyers, they have their own language, all types of acronyms, and their business models are all unique. There's a lot of complexity there. People, have MBAs, they're super smart, they use a lot of big words. You kind of have to know what you're doing to be able to sell to those people, right? To be able to
Hmm.
effectively sort of synthesize a value proposition, it's really important to be able to know that customer, right? So maybe that for that particular client, they really need to leverage and lean in on the customer set piece. And then the technical or product set, that's something that's kind of near and dear to us. We do a lot of work in data, AI, machine learning, those types of companies. The product itself is so complex. The buyers are the data scientists and the machine learning engineers are so complex. Um, in order to get somebody into a customer facing role and to ramp them up to a point where they're going to be effective, that knowledge gap is excruciating, right? So they kind of really need somebody who understands the tech. So that FACT acronym is just a good way to kind of bucket out what you need and figure out what's most important, what maybe you'll compromise on and what maybe you can't, right? So there's that. The other thing I would say is, the first thing you should do as a hiring manager is always hit your network, right? Keep your network alive. That's
Hmm.
just like best practices. I always advise people like go to your network, whether that's via LinkedIn, people you used to work with, whatever. That's the first place you want to go. And then after that, you really need a recruiter's help, right? And I know it's a little biased because I am a recruiter, but even if it's somebody in-house, you need to be able to have a really strong working relationship with that person, strong open lines of communication. They need to be on the exact same page of exactly what you need. And you need somebody with like at least a little bit of domain expertise so they understand what you're talking about and what you're looking for.
Hmm.
So that's, I would say, my best advice in terms of what you should do if you're going to market to hire somebody.
Super cool. I love the fact acronym, the framework. I'm curious, can you break out a little bit? So the function and the technical product set, there's probably some overlap there. I'm just curious, how do you separate those two? Or maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. Because the function sounds like it's, have you done this job before in this space? The
Right.
technical is maybe a little bit deeper than that. Or yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So functional, would be like, okay, we need a VP of sales, somebody who's been a sales leader, right? The achievement is maybe we want somebody who's taken a company from 1 to 10 million in revenue, would be a good example of that. The customer set, maybe they want somebody who's sold into enterprise or specifically oil and gas. And then the technical or product set, we want somebody who knows data science or has sold an ML ops platform before. That would be a good example of like a
Got
technical
it.
or product set. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yep, totally. So kind of going a little bit deeper, it sounds like, or specific to the product, versus it being the role or maybe the industry kind of falls under the function side. Interesting. Out of those four buckets, I know you said it's hard to find always your perfect candidate, and you might not be able to check all four of those boxes. Um, how much, yeah, first of all, how do you analyze how to prioritize? And then, you know, how important is it that that person has done the job at the previous company or done the specific? I mean, I know these are really probably really hard or really broad questions, and there's probably so much uniqueness for each industry. And,
Hmm.
so I'm just curious your thoughts on like, how do you even evaluate? Because those things sound amazing, but how do I prioritize which one comes first or like a deal breaker, number one? And then number
Hmm.
two, where do you set kind of boundaries with that of like, is it something that they do internally, or is this something a recruiter can kind of help you analyze of like, it's really important you should have somebody that's done that from 1 to 10 or yeah, any
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah. So for sure. So each company is different, like you said, but I think as a hiring manager, you need to figure out where the most complexity lies within those four buckets. So a good way to think about that is like, what do I just really not have time to train on? What's going to take too long to train, right? So like I said, like the data AI ML folks, they might really need somebody with that technical piece covered. So they don't have to worry about training them up. The company that sells into private equity, they might really need to focus on finding somebody who has experience selling into that same customer cohort, right? It really depends on where the most complexity is, what is going to take the longest to train up. And that's how I think you tell, hey, this is really important and non-negotiable. Maybe we can give on some of these other things. Um, so I think that was your question. I think.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, no, I love that. Where does the complexity lie? And I think that is a great question to ask and to analyze like where where is going to be that sticking point where I mean there's like general skill sets, there's general requirements, but when it comes down to it where yeah, what part and that could be the size of company, right? Or it could be like a very generic role in some ways or not have a generic product but not have, but be a very specific size company that you need like hey, I need somebody that's gone from 100 million to a billion, right? Like I need that could be the complexity, or it could be the actual product like you mentioned, right? Like if it's an ML or an AI product where you're like, or the private equity like you said earlier, if you have never marketed or sold into that vertical or industry, you probably would be a very high risk to take somebody that's never done that and put them in there. Super
Potentially.
interesting. Um, yeah, potentially. Yeah, and I also like you said at the very beginning too, where there's a role for everyone. And what maybe in that question, where have you been most surprised? Like when folks that you're like, oh my gosh, like this person, maybe didn't necessarily fit the standard, but they end up being a great hire. Like where's that room for like, being surprised? Maybe culture fit, or maybe it's
Yeah.
they're super hungry, they're super eager,
Mm.
they're just yeah. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I don't know if I can point my finger to any particular one of those segments where it's like, oh, hey, like this maybe doesn't count as much. The one thing I would say is, I think it's important for candidates to understand the seat that employers are in the sense that you know they're making really important decisions with relatively small data sets, right? Maybe throughout an interview process you spend, I don't know, 3 4 hours with a company, and then they need to go and make a decision on how much output they're going to get out of like 40 hours a week for the next x many year. It's
Mm-hmm.
a big decision, right? It costs
Mm-hmm.
money, right? So I think what they try to do is de-risk that decision as much as possible. And the way they do that is by trying to find somebody who's done as close to that exact job as humanly possible and had success. That being said, we all know there's a ton of other factors at play that make somebody successful in a role or not. The problem is you can't really test for a lot of that stuff, right? Does a
Mm,
person have gumption? Is a person, right, friendly in the office, right? A lot of that stuff is really hard to tell through an interview process. What I would
mm,
say is,
mm,
you know, if you can figure out if somebody has like get up and go, as cliche as it sounds, if they have gumption, if they're
mm,
really good about following up, if they're, magnetized to your mission, right? That's where it comes back to the motivators, and they're just a generally competent person. People will
mm,
figure stuff out, right? We've
mm,
made placements that, were completely out of left field with some of our best clients, but because of who that person is as a person, not on their
mm,
resume,
mm,
they just went in and crushed, right? So,
mm.
but again, going back to the seat that employers are in, it's really hard to test for a lot of that stuff. So they
Yeah.
need to do what they can to say, hey, I'm making a good decision. They need to be able to go to their board and be like, hey, this was a really good decision on paper, even though it didn't work out, right? I sort of did the right thing, right? So, I think it's just important for candidates to understand the seat that employers are in, why they do what they do, why they make certain
Yeah.
decisions. And if you look at it from that point of view, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, well said, Graham. That's super helpful. And it's like almost like you're de-risking the hiring process and the intangibles, they're hard to quantify, like you mentioned, right? And the tangible things, what's on your resume or what your experience is, may not be a complete indicator of success. It will give you some rational, right, boundaries to be like, and I like your fact. I think that's a perfect, like, here's your rational, like, okay, this person, all things, considered, they've, are most likely to be successful in the role. And, I kind of complement that. I've, Patrick Lencioni, I forget what his book is called. He has a bunch of books, but one of his books is on hiring, and he talks about or building an ideal. It's, I think, building your ideal team, um, and he has a kind of a framework where he talks about humble, hungry, and smart. And he talks about being humble, right? That's obvious. Being willing to adapt, being hungry, you're willing to grow and take on the challenge, and ambitious, and whatnot. And then the smart part is people smart, and mostly it's about being having emotional intelligence, and not so much intelligent, and not so much intellectual side, but more emotional intelligence. And those are the non-tangibles, which I think can complement and things you want to look for sure, and that come, quote unquote culture fit, but also to de-risk, to your point, I think to have that baseline of like, that fact framework, which is super cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll
yeah,
just
any
add
thoughts
to
there?
that. Right? So, like, I think we can all agree as human beings that those intangible things are really the most important things. The problem is
Mm,
again, they're hard to test for. And if you're going to design a search to go find the right marketer, you can't say, okay, let's look at all the people in North America that have really high EQ, right?
mm,
You're lost. You need some sort of compass. The other thing I would say is as you progress in your career as a leader, as a hirer and a manager of people, you will start to fine tune your gut instincts, right? And those gut instincts on all that intangible stuff, that will really make or break you when it comes to hiring, right? You need to
mm,
learn what to look for in those hires. And I think that just comes with reps over time.
mm. Well said. I love that. Super helpful. Yeah, and having that gut feeling, and making sure you don't discount that, because I think that kind of ties into the intangibles and that connection, the cultural fit, whatever that means. All the things we're talking about, right? The things that are hard to quantify. Super cool. I'd love to hear just if you have any thoughts on like best, good questions to ask, as a hiring manager. What are your, especially, I mean, obviously there's the fact, which is the tangible things, but fact or in non-tangible, what are your thoughts on like good questions to kind of dig deeper, get to know somebody in the short time you have?
That's a good question. I think it's really dependent on the role. So I don't know if I have a perfect answer for you. However, what I would say is the interviews that we've seen be really effective and highlighting the right people for the job, they kind of go like this, right? They start with a meet and greet type thing, high level, get to know you, ask a couple of high level questions about the background, share a little information about what we're trying to accomplish here at this company. From there, the midsection of the interview becomes sort of a dual way discovery process, if you will. The company is learning more about that professional is learning more about the company. And then towards the end of the process, once both parties have collected information, there is an aspect of collaboration, right? Whether that
Mm.
is, I hate to say it, and I know candidates are going to hate to hear this, but like some sort of like project or presentation, or even it doesn't have to be that. It could just be a conversation, but starting to diagnose some of the pains that that company is experiencing specific to that role, that function, and
Mm.
then making some recommendations. So kind of like you start jamming a little bit towards the end
Mm.
of the process, and you get a little sneak preview of what it'll be like to work with that person. So I think those types of interview processes, whether it's at the executive level or at the frontline level, tend to be really good indicators, and like, they're able to kind of show you, hey, this is what it's going to be like coming to work with this person every day. So we've seen that we've seen that work pretty well.
I love that. That's super cool. And I think there's, yeah, it is definitely more work for the interviewee and whatnot. But there's also, yeah, you get a feel, and it's probably a good litmus test for them too to see how the person responds to their
Yeah.
project. And yeah, on both ends, it's a really good way to kind of a working session in a way to get your feel. And super cool. Before we kind of transition from to the employee side. I'd love to hear any other takeaways, any other high level like best practices that come to mind, things we haven't talked today about, hiring managers and folks going to, finding go to market folks for their team.
The only other thing I would say, right, and again, this is a little bit biased, right, because I am a recruiter, but I think you need to know, what makes a good recruiter, right? And how do you find one? I think
Mm.
these agency partnerships are really, really pivotal and important, especially if you find good ones. They can really change the trajectory of your career, both on the candidate side, but also, as a hiring manager. And I think there's a couple things that you need to look for, right? The first is you want somebody who has domain experience in your space. They need to be able to talk the talk, right? They need to know, the different players in the market. They need to know where the bodies are buried. They need to know the lingo, so domain experience, I think, is really, really critical. And then the second thing is you got to find trust, right? And again, this goes back to those
Mm.
intangible things that can be tough to test over a short period of time, but are proven over
Mm.
the long run. But if you can find somebody that will give you good advice, even if it means that they might lose money because of the advice, then I
Mm.
think you hit the jackpot, right? Stay close to that individual, stay close to that agency. They will serve you very well for the long run. So that's the only advice I can give you there.
Oh, super cool. I love that. And maybe we can tie that into the employee side of finding a good agency. So what I heard was somebody that's domain experience, right, in your space. And I think even with globalization, I've talked about this a couple times on my show, like there's so many different ways to solve a problem. And so we're going down to this like nichification or vertical everything, right? Where you're like, hey, you have so many options. So it's like, why not choose the SaaS platform? Why not choose the agency? Why not choose the employee that's worked in this exact same field? Because there's options for that now, and it's I think from a business standpoint, that's a way for folks to differentiate themselves is like be experts in that one area.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, hiring, whether it's your employee or partnering with a search team, an agency, recruiting agency, to make sure they're experts in that field because you can't because they're out there, right? And why not find somebody that's an expert in that space and knows all the nuances because it's like yeah, it's all those little details, right? In anything like whether it's a specific industry you've worked in, like as a marketer it's like if I'm marketing to different folks it's like oh my gosh the nitty gritty it makes or breaks your entire campaign, it makes and breaks your entire go to market if you don't really understand your, your buyer and your market. So
Hmm.
super
Hmm.
cool. I love to tie that into on the search side from an employee standpoint. Kind of spending a couple minutes in there before we wrap up here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, best practices for folks looking for their next role. Is it, maybe you mentioned one already, which is finding an agency that is in your vertical or in your space. Any other thoughts you have on best practices for folks finding their next role?
Absolutely. So you remember that FACT acronym I gave you, right? For employers trying to find the right types of employees. That same acronym works for employees trying to find new
Mm,
gigs, right? So
mm,
you just reverse engineer that, right? So
mm.
I think about finding a new job, and this is great because your whole audience is all go-to-market people, so they're going to love this, right? Finding a new job is just like going to market with a product, right? Because it is. In this case, you're the product, right? So the first thing you need to do if you're going to market with a new product is find your ICP, right? Your ideal customer profile. I like to call it the IEP, ideal employer profile, right? So
Mm.
how do you do that, right? You use that FACT acronym, right, to figure out who you are as a professional. And then you reverse engineer that into, okay, what are the companies, who are the people at those companies that are going to be most likely excited to hear from me, right? So you need to define exactly who your target audience is, right? Maybe that is a certain sector, maybe it's a certain company size, maybe it's a certain hiring manager of a certain type of department, maybe it's a certain geographic location. And once you have that, the second thing I would say, and people probably aren't going to love this, but you kind of got to go outbound, right? It's work, it takes some time. But if you look at what's going on in today, 2023, if any company posts a job, right? Like if you go on LinkedIn right now and look at job postings, the job posting has been up for a week. There's 260 people who've applied, right? There's so much noise. It's such a crowded channel. So it's really hard to break through and actually get a real shot at having a connection with that hiring manager and being considered. So what we've seen work is people actually going outbound with their product, which is them. So, building a list of target companies, building a list of target hiring managers at those companies and engaging with them, through LinkedIn is phenomenal for this, right? Obviously. So, doing something as simple as hitting them with a super soft CTA, low friction. You don't want to be like, hey, can you hire me? Hey, can I have an interview? That, no one loves that. You want to give them the chance to say no without feeling awkward because you still want to, engage in a dialogue. But something as simple as, hey, been following your company for a while. Seems like you guys are doing some awesome stuff. I'm sort of quietly looking for my next gig. If and when time is right, would love to chat. We've seen that work a lot. The other thing, and the other thing I would say is like you want to try and add value where you can, right? Let's just say you have some specialized niche knowledge. And based on your research, you can probably make a good guess that that company is going through a challenge that you've already been through. If you can lead with like, hey, I've been following your company. I see you guys are probably doing XYZ, which means you're probably in this situation. We've been through that before. Would love to hop on and tell you a little bit about how we've sort of like seen around that corner or whatever. We found that to work out as well. So, yeah, find out who you want to target, go reach out to them. You can apply for the job, always apply for the job, but actually go and reach out to that person, whether it's an email, a cold call, a LinkedIn DM. And then, of course, you want a few people like me in your corner that you can trust, recruiters that play in your space, that can be an extra set of eyes and ears, on the market for you.
Ah, super cool. That's awesome. I love those. I mean, I love how you kind of flip the ICP and the ideal employer profile. As a marketer, go-to-market leader, I've definitely obviously resonate with that and in reverse engineering it. And I think go-to-market folks have like no excuse to have a really
Exactly.
solid outreach and building relationships, networking, marketing themselves. Obviously, it's It's like a lot of marketing agencies, they actually aren't really great at marketing themselves because they're spending so much time doing marketing. I can see that being the case for a lot of go-to-market
Yeah,
leaders. Like, hey, we're so much time,
shift the paradigm.
working in my job, I have a hard time, you know, totally. And I love that. And I love a couple of different things I took notes here. First, adding value when you can, right? If you notice something, and that's as good, like go to market in general. Like, how do you provide value? Whether it's sharing interesting podcasts, whether it's you notice something on their website, a strategy they may want to think about implementing, um, whatever it may be. Something on their LinkedIn and pointing that out, and providing value versus just asking and going in with a very selfish, self-promoting angle. And I like that soft CTA is when the time is right. Super cool, like just kind of open-ended, not pushy, especially if you're trying to build relationships in advance, right? They're not hiring. It's a great way to be like, just kind of getting your feelers out there and yeah, it just seems really empathetic and putting yourselves in other people's shoes. And then lastly, having recruiters in your space that you can leverage, build relationships, even network, but then also get introductions and also best practices too. I'm sure every recruiter, like even this conversation, I've learned so much. I've always, like, every recruiter I've ever talked to, I'm always like, oh, that's fascinating, I didn't learn that. Or they always have a different angle perspective, so you can learn so much from recruiters or even folks in HR that do this, internal recruiters too. You can learn so much from, so leveraging their expertise. Super cool. Any other best practices or thoughts that come to mind from the employee side?
From the employee side. So, well, just going back to that same, let's just say you do a touch point with a hiring manager on LinkedIn and you hit them with that soft CTA. And let's just say, what's the first thing that they're going to do, right? They're going to look at your LinkedIn profile. That's like, that's exactly what you wanted to begin with. What's the point of applying to a job with your resume is to just have somebody look at your profile, right? But it's not happening because, there's
Mm.
so many applications that those companies just have bots sifting through the resumes. So the hiring manager is not looking at your resume to begin with, right? But if you directly reach out to them, even if they don't respond, they're going to glance at your profile and that is a look, right? So that's a win there. The only other thing I would say, right, if you're looking for a new job, um, sometimes you already have a job, but maybe it sucks or it's not that great or it could be better. Other times you don't have a job and you're looking for a job. The one thing I would leave, people with that are looking for a new job is you need to make sure that you're protecting your emotional state, right? I think that's super, super important. In 2023, our society, it's really easy to like tie your identity to what you do, but what you do is not who you are, right? And if you're unemployed right now, or if you're like struggling to find a new gig and your current job sucks, and you're not getting calls back, on the disgruntled. Like I said, there is a perfect job out there for everybody. And if you let that kind of like attack your identity and your self, worth, that's going to come off the next time that you go and interview, right? So you need to make sure that you're protecting, your emotional state and just know that sometimes you got to put in the work, you got to put in the numbers, you got to get a certain amount of shots on goal. Eventually, one's going to drop in the net and it's going to happen. You just got to put in the work, put in the time, stay positive, and you're going to
Mm.
win. And that would be the last sort of like leaving, if you take anything from this type thing, take that.
Oh, that's awesome, Graham. Thanks for sharing. That's encouraging for me in general. I think it's good life advice and to be hopeful. The world is abundant. There's lots of opportunities out there. And even what you
Mhm.
said earlier at the beginning of our conversation, that there's a role for everyone, right? And just because the one you're going after, isn't the right one, doesn't mean you should be discouraged. And keep pressing forward, keep looking. And it's a numbers game in a lot of ways too, right? There's so much competition. You have to get a certain amount of swings to be able to actually get that home run. So super cool, great advice, Graham. Thanks so much for coming on. How can folks connect with you online?
Well, being a recruiter, of course, I'm a LinkedIn junkie. So, I post some cool stuff I'd like to think from time to time. So you can check me out there. It's just Graham Locklear. You can look me up. Our website is msearchco.com. If you're hiring in GTM, you need some help, hit me up. We'd love to chat. And yeah. That's the best way to find me.
Awesome, Graham. Thanks again for coming on. I'll definitely put all those links in the show notes. Really great conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will as well. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see everyone next week. Thanks,
Thanks,
Graham.
Taylor. All right.